She was already inside when the chaos began. No grand entrance, no warning, just a moment frozen in the quiet tension that only follows when the wrong person dares to exist in the wrong place. They saw her skin first, then her silence, then the confidence that made them uncomfortable. That was enough. Within minutes, hands were on her, voices raised, her dignity crushed beneath polished shoes and whispered orders. To the world, she was just a headline, a soundbite, a problem. But none of them knew what they'd just done, not to a stranger, but to someone with the power to burn the system down from the inside. What started as public humiliation would spiral into one of the most explosive reckonings they'd ever face. Watch carefully. This story turns sharply. If you're ready for truth that doesn't flinch, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what justice means to you. Cordelia Banks exited her silver sedan with the composure of someone who had fought long, hard battles and won. Her heels clicked crisply against the concrete, each step intentional, as she approached the towering glass doors of Empire National Bank. The morning air was cool, the kind that whispered fresh starts, but Cordelia wasn't here for a new beginning. She was here to close a loop. After 2 years of legal wrangling, court hearings, and probate disputes, she was now the legal inheritor of the Grant Real Estate Trust, properties her grandfather built from nothing. One of those properties housed this very bank. Her folder, tucked beneath her arm, held original lease documents, proof of ownership, and official notification letters. Her purpose was simple: hand-deliver the updated lease terms to the bank's regional manager as required by contract. She even scheduled the appointment a week in advance. But plans don't always mean protection. As she stepped through the revolving doors, she caught the faint scent of cologne and the chill of air conditioning wrapping around her. She barely took 3 steps into the glossy, marble-floored lobby when a voice, sharp, guttural, cut across the space. "Hey, back off. You're not supposed to be here." The words struck like a slap. Cordelia stopped mid-step, blinking in confusion. She glanced around. No alarms, no rush of panic, no visible threat. Just her, standing with papers in hand. But the voice belonged to a tall security guard rushing toward her, hand already resting on the baton at his hip. His badge read Trent, and the scowl etched across his face told her he wasn't asking questions. He was issuing orders. "Excuse me," she asked, holding her folder tighter. "I have an appointment with Mr. Dorian, the regional manager. I'm just here to deliver. I said you need to leave." Trent barked, cutting her off as he closed the distance. "Now, you're making a mistake," Cordelia said, trying to stay calm. "I have documents. My name is Cordelia Banks. Please." That was all she got out. Trent didn't hesitate. He reached out, grabbed her forearm roughly, and wrenched it to the side. The folder slipped from her grip, contents spilling in every direction. Legal documents fluttered across the pristine floor like dry leaves. Cordelia gasped, stumbling backward. "Let go of me," she cried, her voice cracking as she tried to resist. But he was stronger, faster. In one brutal motion, he spun her around, slammed her against the cold marble floor, and twisted her wrist behind her back. A sharp, searing pain shot up her arm. "Stop," she screamed. "You're hurting me." Her cheek scraped the floor, her blazer tore at the shoulder seam, and a small crowd of bank patrons and employees watched in stunned silence. Some pulled out phones, others averted their gaze. No one stepped forward. "You don't get to march in here like you own the place," Trent muttered through gritted teeth as he pinned her down. "You people think you can just demand attention and disrupt everything." From the corner of her eye, Cordelia saw a middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit emerge from an office. His name tag read Dorian. Their appointment was scheduled for 9:30. It was 9:27. He crossed his arms, watching as if this were a minor disturbance and not a violent assault. "Mr. Dorian," Cordelia called out, trying to raise her head. "Tell him, I have a meeting with you." He didn't move. "Trent, handle it," he said, then turned and disappeared into his office again. Cordelia was lifted roughly to her feet, still held by the wrist, pain radiating from her elbow. The torn edge of her blazer flapped limply as she was marched toward the doors. Her documents lay scattered behind her, unnoticed and ignored. "No, wait." please." "This is a mistake," she shouted. Her cries echoed off the walls, bouncing between teller windows and glossy marble. No one answered. No one stopped it. Trent shoved her through the door, out into the morning glare. She stumbled on the steps, nearly falling. A passerby glanced her way, but kept walking. Someone across the street raised their phone and began recording. She reached for her documents, those important legal papers that now lay scattered across the pavement like litter, fluttering in the breeze kicked up by passing cars. As she tried to collect them, a hot splash of liquid struck her neck. She gasped and turned her head just in time to see a coffee cup roll to a stop beside her. Someone walking past had thrown it, without warning, without words, just tossed the steaming liquid at her as if she were garbage blocking their path. Laughter came next. Not loud, not overt, but unmistakably cruel. Cordelia looked up to see two teenage boys filming her from across the street, one holding his phone vertically while the other muttered something about crazy Karens pulling stunts. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but no sound came out. Her voice felt lodged in her throat, thick with rage, humiliation, and the bitter taste of injustice. Inside the bank, faces peered out from behind the tinted glass, but none of them moved. Not one person came out to help. Not the teller who had watched Trent drag her. Not the manager who had scheduled her meeting. Not a single employee. They simply stared, satisfied to see the scene play out beyond the safety of their walls. Cordelia wiped the coffee from her neck with her sleeve, feeling the wet fabric stick to her skin. Her breathing was shallow, her dignity shattered. She tried to gather what few documents hadn't blown into the street, holding them with shaking hands. Her phone buzzed in her bag, but she didn't look at it. What could she say to anyone right now? That she'd been manhandled by a security guard in broad daylight while delivering official documents to a tenant of her property? Who would even believe that? Across the street, a woman in a lavender suit coat hesitated, watching Cordelia with narrowed eyes. For a moment, Cordelia thought she might cross over, offer a word of concern. But the woman turned away. That was the hardest part, not the pain, not even the public humiliation, but the apathy, the total, casual indifference to her suffering. When she finally reached her car and sat inside, slamming the door shut, her hands were still trembling. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked back at her with wide, reddened eyes. She didn't cry. She wanted to, but the tears refused to come, as if even her grief had been stunned into silence. 10 minutes passed before she could start the engine. When she finally pulled away, she didn't drive home. Instead, she went straight to her attorney's office. She needed anyone, to see this for what it was: a violation, an assault, a mistake that would cost that bank everything. Or so she thought. By the time Cordelia arrived and explained what happened, her attorney, a calm, methodical woman named Latrice Hammond, was already scrolling through her phone with a tight expression. "It's up already," she muttered, turning the screen toward Cordelia. There it was, a shaky, vertical video of the incident. From the moment she entered the bank to the second Trent shoved her outside. The footage didn't show her documents, didn't show the calendar invite, didn't show her saying the name Dorian. It captured only her face and her screams. The headline read, "Security stops violent attempt at fraud in local bank." Beneath it were thousands of comments, most siding with the guard, many mocking her appearance. One read, "That's what happens when you think looking professional means you're entitled to everything." Another simply said, "She's lucky they didn't call ICE." Cordelia stared at the screen, numb. "They think I was stealing something," she said finally. "They think I'm some con artist." Latrice nodded, her voice taut with anger. "They edited it. Cut the beginning. You can tell, it's choppy right before you speak. Someone inside wanted this to look a certain way." Cordelia closed her eyes. "How do we fix it?" "We don't," Latrice replied. "Not today. We file an assault claim. We collect your appointment records. We subpoena the surveillance footage." "But Cordelia," she paused, "you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get worse before it gets better." And it did. Within 24 hours, local news picked up the story. A conservative blog amplified it, labeling her a race hustler playing victim for a payout. Her work inbox overflowed with hate mail. Anonymous calls bombarded her cell. One message said, "Hope you enjoyed jail time, scammer." Another read, "Should have tossed you while they had the chance." Cordelia unplugged her landline that night. She pulled her curtains closed, sat on the couch, and tried to breathe. The sense of injustice burned in her chest, hot and heavy, but the deeper pain was the loneliness. The feeling that she, a woman of logic, of earned power, had been reduced to nothing by a few seconds of video and a false narrative. Worse, the world seemed eager to believe it. Her niece called from college. "Auntie, are you okay?" she asked, voice trembling. Latrice printed the documents, notarized them in the presence of a clerk, and together they walked them directly to the bank's downtown headquarters. It wasn't the branch where Cordelia had been assaulted. That one was already sealed off to her, but this location, by policy, had to accept official legal complaints from the public. At the front desk, a woman with frosty blonde hair and a practiced smile accepted the folder, stamped a receipt, and promised it would be processed and escalated within 48 hours. Cordelia kept her tone even, her hand steady, but inside she was raw. She hoped, naively, that once the right people saw the documents, once the truth came to light, someone would apologize. Someone would fix this. But 2 days passed, then 3, then a full week. No call came, no email. When Latrice followed up, she was transferred from one department to another until finally, someone in risk and compliance claimed no record of the complaint existed. They said nothing had been received. When presented with the stamped receipt, the representative stuttered, then stated coldly that it must have been a clerical oversight. Cordelia's stomach turned. A clerical oversight meant nothing to them. But to her, it was another door slammed in her face. Another quiet erasure. They didn't need to physically remove her anymore. They could delete her existence from their systems. Worse, the silence wasn't just bureaucratic. It became deliberate. One morning, Cordelia tried to log into her business account to pay a vendor. The screen flashed red. Access denied. Please contact your administrator. She did. The answer was stunning. Your profile was flagged as high risk due to recent behavioral escalations. We are conducting a security review. She hung up, stunned. She had no access to her own money. She went to a different branch to try to resolve it. This time, she didn't even get past the entry vestibule. As soon as her ID was scanned at the door, a light flashed red. A silent alarm triggered, and 2 uniformed guards emerged, surrounding her without a word. "Is there a problem?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "You've been flagged in our internal system," one of them said. "Corporate security has listed you as a restricted client. You'll need to leave." "On what grounds?" she demanded. "What database? Who listed me?" "We're just following instructions," he replied flatly. She was escorted out again, this time without bruises, but the wound cut deeper. She wasn't just denied justice. She was now treated as a threat. She called Latrice, who immediately requested all records and flag codes associated with Cordelia's accounts. The reply came 3 days later in the form of a legal memorandum filled with vague language. It stated that Empire National had a right to protect its employees and clients from individuals exhibiting volatile or aggressive behavior, and cited online reports of disruptive conduct as justification for the flag. In one swift, quiet move, they had weaponized the viral video to brand her a danger. The internal system marked her as non-compliant, with a red tag that instructed all branches to deny her access. She had become, officially, an invisible person within their empire. Meanwhile, her business transactions stalled. Clients backed out. Vendors refused contracts without bank verification. The fallout spread like ink through water. Each institution she contacted responded the same way. "We're reviewing our relationship due to recent developments." Cordelia wasn't being silenced. She was being erased. And no one, not one person within the organization, stepped up to question it. Not the clerk who received her documents. Not the manager who had booked the meeting. Not the HR official who had viewed her footage. All of them chose silence. Not out of ignorance, but out of allegiance to the system, to convenience, to fear. On social media, her story was being debated, dissected, and twisted. Some defended her, calling her brave, but far more labeled her dangerous, unpredictable, or dishonest. Someone had doxed her address, and she received another anonymous threat. Next time you trespass, you'll leave in a body bag. She gave the voicemail to the police. They took the report, nodded politely, and did nothing. Her reputation, her access to resources, and her freedom to conduct her business were now crumbling, all without a formal charge or hearing. Cordelia began recording everything, every call, every interaction, every denial. She printed every email, stored every voicemail, and backed up every document to a secure drive. She stopped expecting answers. At first, she thought maybe it was an error, a temporary security block due to unusual activity. She had been logging in often, sending records to her lawyer, backing up legal correspondence, and following up with contacts. But then her cloud drive showed the same problem. Her digital identity was evaporating. She picked up her phone to call her IT technician, but before she could dial, another notification appeared. This one was from the mortgage division of the very bank she now fought. The subject line read, "Account review urgent." Cordelia opened the email slowly, already dreading what she'd find. The contents were brief but chilling. Your property loan account is currently under compliance review due to recent inconsistencies identified in your client risk profile. Please refrain from initiating any further transactions until we complete our evaluation. She read it 3 times, heart pounding. Inconsistencies? Her mortgage was fully paid. She had the documents to prove it, signed and notarized just months prior when she cleared the last of the balance. She called the helpline. They kept her on hold for over an hour before transferring her 3 times. When someone finally picked up, their answer was vague and cold. "It's just an internal audit process, Ms. Banks." Routine. But Cordelia knew better. Nothing about this was routine. This was part of a campaign, a quiet dismantling of her identity, one piece at a time. With her digital access cut and her property flagged, she decided to leave her apartment and go straight to the courthouse to retrieve her original deed filings in person. As she reached for her bag, another email came through. This one stopped her cold. It was from the Professional Board of Real Estate Compliance. Subject: Notice of Suspension. The message informed her that her license to operate as a commercial property liaison had been temporarily suspended pending an investigation into alleged misconduct. She sat down slowly, blinking at the words. Alleged misconduct. There was no case number, no complainant listed, no incident detail. Just a generic statement and a digital signature. Cordelia's license was her livelihood. Without it, she couldn't act on behalf of clients. She couldn't enter into contracts. She couldn't even advocate for herself in her role as a property owner without risking additional penalties. She tried calling the licensing board. Voicemail. She left a message, tried another number, waited on hold. And when a receptionist finally answered, they simply said, "The matter is being reviewed. Please refrain from further inquiry until you are contacted by an investigator." Her hands trembled as she set down the phone. She looked around her apartment, at the walls once filled with pride and framed achievements. Now they felt like decorations on a cage. Latrice, her lawyer, called minutes later. Cordelia didn't even have to explain. "I saw the suspension notice," Latrice said, her voice a mix of fury and disbelief. "They're tightening the noose. They're not just trying to erase your access. They're trying to erase your credibility. They're dismantling my life," Cordelia replied quietly. "And no one's stopping them." "We will," Latrice promised. "But we need leverage. We need proof of intent, not just damage." That evening, Cordelia combed through every backup she had, searching for inconsistencies, for anything she might have missed. But she knew it wasn't about what she did wrong. It was about control. If they could disconnect her from the digital world, they could isolate her. If they could question her license, they could delegitimize her voice. If they could flag her mortgage, they could take her home. That night, she heard a noise at her door, 3 loud knocks. When she peered through the peephole, she saw 2 men in plain clothes holding clipboards. One introduced himself through the door as a representative from the City Compliance Bureau. "We're here to inspect the property. Anonymous report of violations." Cordelia didn't open the door. She told them through the lock that she would not be engaging without legal counsel present. They left, but not without slipping a red sticker under the door, notice of intent to inspect. It was happening fast now, faster than she could respond. Each step, digital locks, mortgage review, license suspension, now home inspection, was designed to keep her off balance, to keep her from organizing a defense. It wasn't just an attack on her reputation. It was an attack on her stability. Every institution she had once relied on was turning against her, or worse, pretending neutrality while enabling the erosion. By the next morning, 3 of her long-term business partners had pulled out of active projects, citing recent reputational concerns. One firm she had mentored for years even sent a letter asking her to remove herself from future joint ventures until her name was cleared. The implication was clear. They didn't believe her side. Or maybe they did, but it didn't matter. Cordelia now carried the stigma of accusation without proof, suspicion without trial. In this system, that was enough. She was falling through a trapdoor, and the people around her were pulling it closed rather than lending a hand. Alone in her apartment, she finally cried. Silent tears, no sobs, just a slow unraveling of composure. No one wanted to be associated with a woman whose name triggered search results filled with accusations, speculation, and controversy. Each headline cast her in the shadow of guilt, never once offering her side. Then, as if to confirm the next stage of her undoing, her phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, "Notice of court filing temporary restraining order." She opened it with numb fingers, her heart already sinking. It was official. The legal team representing Empire National Bank had filed for a restraining order against her, claiming that she posed an ongoing threat to their operations. The language was methodical and brutal. They accused her of exhibiting repeated aggressive behavior toward bank staff, of making unauthorized attempts to access restricted areas, and of disrupting operations in a pattern consistent with harassment. Her mouth fell open as she read the list of falsehoods. None of it was true. Every one of her visits had been documented. She had never once raised her voice, never threatened anyone, never violated protocol. She had walked in with legal documents, with appointments confirmed, and had been attacked, dismissed, and silenced. But here they were, rewriting the narrative under the cover of legal language. She immediately called Latrice, who promised to file an emergency objection, but the damage was already taking root. A restraining order, even a temporary one, would show up in databases, on professional background checks, in real estate and business filings. It was a red flag she couldn't afford. Not now, not with everything else hanging by a thread. And then came the final insult, the footage. Someone had leaked a short clip of the incident to a local news station, and within hours it had been shared across dozens of platforms. Cordelia watched it, stunned, as her own image appeared on screen. But it wasn't the truth. The footage had been edited. Gone was the first half of her entrance, her calm demeanor, her professional greeting to the receptionist, her patient wait at the desk. Instead, the clip began abruptly, just as Trent approached. The angle was tight, the audio distant. Her voice sounded sharp, desperate, as she pleaded for him to stop. The video showed her reaching for her folder, which was cut to look like she lunged. The moment he grabbed her was trimmed to imply she resisted. The segment ended with her on the floor flailing, as the caption at the bottom read, "Woman causes disturbance at Empire National Bank." She stared at the screen, mouth dry, fingers clenched. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. But it was believable enough to the average viewer, and that was the point. The court of public opinion didn't need truth. It just needed a version of the story that fit their assumptions. And this one did. It painted her as the angry black woman trope, the disruptor, the one who just couldn't follow the rules. By the end of the day, the clip had reached national news aggregators. Talk radio stations picked it up. Anonymous pundits debated whether she had planned the whole thing to sue for a payout. One panelist even said, "You can tell from her body language she wanted confrontation." Cordelia wanted to scream. She wanted to break something, but she did neither. Instead, she called Latrice and asked one question. "Can we prove the footage was altered?" Latrice paused. "Maybe. We can demand the full surveillance logs, but they'll fight it. And even if we get them, they'll delay it until the restraining order hearing is over. That's the play. They make you look volatile, file the order, and use that to justify everything else." Cordelia rubbed her temples. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. With the restraining order in place, she couldn't come near any branch office. She couldn't deliver legal documents in person. She couldn't attend meetings regarding her own property. And any attempt to do so could be labeled a violation. It was a legal cage, a setup designed to bait her into reacting. Because if she did, they'd have more footage, more proof, more headlines. It wasn't just about silencing her. It was about transforming her into the villain of her own story. The public wouldn't care about context. They wouldn't ask why the video was so short or why there was no sound before the moment of conflict. They wouldn't question the timing of the restraining order or the loss of her digital access. They would just see a woman being handled and assume the worst. By the time Cordelia finally closed her laptop, her face was blank. Her name was being stripped of credibility. Her voice was being edited out. Her rights were being turned into liabilities. She couldn't walk into her own property without being treated like an intruder. Her digital accounts remained locked. Her mortgage remained under review. Her license remained suspended. Her reputation remained in free fall. And now, just when she thought they couldn't take anything else from her, she opened her mailbox and found a thick envelope marked official notice. Inside it was an eviction letter from her landlord. The wording was formal, impersonal, and devastating. Due to concerns about public safety, neighborhood peace, and rising legal scrutiny, the property management company had decided not to renew her lease. She had 30 days to vacate the premises. Cordelia gripped the edge of the counter as the letter shook in her hands. The apartment she'd lived in for 6 years, the home she had curated with art, books, and years of memories, was no longer hers. She wasn't late on rent. She wasn't disruptive. She wasn't problematic. She was simply inconvenient. She was now a liability in the eyes of any institution that once considered her a client or a partner. Latrice confirmed what she feared. There was no legal grounds to fight it. The landlord hadn't breached any laws. They were just exercising discretion based on public relations concerns. That afternoon, Cordelia packed 2 boxes, not because she planned to move yet, but because she couldn't stand to look at the space without preparing for its loss. Every framed photo, every certificate on the wall, every piece of furniture became a symbol of what was being stripped away from her. And then came the call she wasn't ready for. Her sister's number lit up her phone. "Cordelia," Mariah said, her voice tight and restrained. "We need to talk about Talia." Cordelia's chest tightened. "What happened?" "She was jumped after school," Mariah said, her voice shaking now. 3 girls from her class. They pushed her, took her phone, and told her to stop defending criminals. Cordelia sank into a chair. "Oh my God, is she okay?" "Physically, she's bruised but not broken," Mariah said. "Emotionally, though, she's a wreck. She's afraid to go back." Cordelia felt sick. Her niece, her brilliant, artistic 12-year-old niece, was being targeted because of her. "They're saying all sorts of things," Mariah continued. "That you lied, that you faked the whole bank thing for money, that you attacked a guard." The kids repeat what they hear online. They've seen the edited video. They believe it. The school says it's investigating, but that it's hard to control narratives outside the classroom. Cordelia didn't respond for a moment. Her heart was hammering, her throat dry. They hadn't just come for her. They were going after her family now. Her shame, her humiliation, had rippled outward, poisoning the lives of those she loved. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize to me," Mariah said, her voice breaking. "I know who you are, but I need to know what you're going to do about it. Because I'm tired of watching you get torn apart while they act like you don't matter." Cordelia wanted to say she had a plan, that the courts would correct the lies, that the truth would eventually surface. But she couldn't make herself believe it. The truth had become irrelevant. She was losing not because she was wrong, but because the system she challenged had declared war. That evening, she turned on the news to hear her name mentioned again. This time, it was a televised press conference. Councilman Harold Vess, a rising political figure with national ambitions, stood at a podium flanked by flags and uniformed officers. "We have seen an unfortunate rise in agitation against our financial institutions," he said. "And while we support peaceful protest and the right to due process, we must also protect our businesses and public spaces from individuals who repeatedly disrupt civil order." Ms. Cordelia Banks is an example of how a personal grievance, when weaponized through social media, can create fear, division, and chaos. Cordelia stared at the screen in disbelief. She wasn't just being erased. She was being demonized. A local politician had used her name, her suffering, as a prop to project law and order. He didn't know her. He hadn't asked for her side. But he used her name like a curse word, and the public absorbed it without question. The next day, more doors closed. A coffee shop she frequented asked her not to return. The dry cleaner claimed they lost her items. A woman at the grocery store recognized her and muttered, "You should be ashamed," as she passed. By the time she arrived at Empire National Bank's flagship branch, it was already surrounded by flashing lights and murmurs. Pedestrians stopped mid-stride, eyes widening as black SUVs rolled to a smooth stop in front of the building. Camera crews scrambled for position. Reporters whispered her name with the same tone they once used to mock her. But today, there was no mockery in their voices. Cordelia stepped out of the vehicle wearing a navy blue suit cut with surgical precision, her posture as straight as steel. Her gait was even unapologetic. Her hair was swept into a clean twist, her chin high. She was flanked by 2 federal agents from the Department of Housing and Urban Development and 1 representative from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Behind them, 2 attorneys walked in silence, one of them Latrice, dressed in black, her eyes sharp. The bank's front doors, once a barrier of humiliation, opened before them. Inside, the same polished marble that had tasted Cordelia's blood now glistened beneath her heels. The same cameras that captured her humiliation now clicked for a different reason. The branch manager, Dorian, was already waiting near the customer service desk, his expression unreadable, but the stiffness in his posture betrayed his nerves. Trent was nowhere in sight. A regional representative from corporate, a man named Gerard Spence, had been flown in from headquarters. His tie was askew, his forehead damp with sweat. "Ms. Banks," he began, voice tense, "this is a private institution, and I must ask." Cordelia held up one hand. The press had been instructed not to follow inside the bank, but their cameras were rolling outside. She didn't need them inside for this part. Her team carried a black leather case. Latrice opened it slowly and extracted a thick binder marked in gold. Property ownership and lease agreements, verified originals. Cordelia took the binder herself and placed it directly on the front desk. "Mr. Spence," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the tense air like a razor, "I am here today not as a customer, but as your landlord. You attacked me, defamed me, and expelled me from a property that your institution leases. A property my grandfather built from the ground up. A property I now own outright." She paused as the words sank in. Spence blinked, speechless. Cordelia continued, "The building you're standing in is owned by a real estate trust called Grant Equity Holdings. That trust transferred majority control to me 8 months ago. My visit here on the day of the incident was to hand-deliver lease amendment documents that your manager was scheduled to review. I have emails, timestamp calls, and security logs to prove every word." She opened the binder to the relevant section and handed a page to the agents. The lead investigator took it, glanced at it, and gave a slight nod. "Leasehold ownership verified," he said to Spence. "You refused your landlord entry, you assaulted her, and then you filed a restraining order based on manipulated footage." The silence that followed was loud enough to hum. Spence looked like he might faint. Dorian stepped backward. A teller gasped quietly. Cordelia didn't stop. Not only was I denied lawful entry," she continued, "but your team then initiated a campaign to erase my identity and destroy my livelihood. You had my mortgage flagged, my professional license suspended, my complaint erased, and your agents tampered with surveillance footage. That footage, by the way, has now been authenticated as doctored by federal forensic experts." She turned toward Dorian. "And you, Mr. Dorian, watched it happen. You allowed it. You condoned it." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Cordelia took a breath. She wasn't angry now. She was unshakable. "Today, I am filing civil and federal claims against Empire National Bank for defamation, assault, violation of housing and civil rights, falsification of public evidence, and obstruction of legal process. My attorneys have already filed preliminary complaints. Subpoenas are in motion. Every branch that treated me like a criminal will be held accountable. Every person who contributed to the collapse of my professional identity will answer under oath." The agents handed sealed envelopes to both Spence and Dorian. It showed Cordelia standing firm, documents in hand, naming each violation committed against her. And it showed the federal agent confirming her legal ownership of the property. But what caught the public's attention was what came next. In a press conference held later that evening on the steps of the federal courthouse, Cordelia stood flanked by her legal team and agents from HUD and the DOJ. The air was thick with reporters, microphones, and silence waiting to be filled. Cordelia took the podium with poise and unflinching resolve. "Over the past 2 months," she began, "I have endured an orchestrated campaign to erase my credibility, silence my voice, and destroy my livelihood. The actions taken by Empire National Bank weren't just immoral, they were illegal." She held up a folder marked Exhibit A. This bank violated federal housing and equity laws, including the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. They denied service, falsified legal documentation, restricted access to financial accounts based on racial and gender bias, and distributed doctored surveillance footage to justify those actions. She flipped open the folder and revealed notarized affidavits, one after another. These documents include sworn statements from former employees of Empire National who have come forward. Whistleblowers. They confirm what I've experienced is not unique. It is systemic. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Journalists jostled for better views. Cameras zoomed in on the exhibits. "What happened to me," she continued, "is part of a broader pattern of exclusion and abuse. I have filed formal charges with the Department of Justice and the U.S. Housing and Urban Development. Civil and criminal investigations are now underway." By the time she stepped down from the podium, her name had ceased being a punchline and become a battle cry. That night, HUD agents executed a warrant to secure all financial and compliance records from the bank's flagship branch. The building was locked down under federal order. Dorian, the branch manager, was escorted out by plainclothes agents as employees watched in stunned silence. The footage, released hours later, showed him refusing to speak to reporters, his expression tight, his hands shaking. The following morning, subpoenas were issued to 7 senior executives, including Gerard Spence. Their assets were frozen, travel restricted, and private communication devices seized. It became the highest-profile civil rights banking case in over a decade. Every bank that had participated in the blacklisting, every official that had remained silent, suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. What was once written off as corporate protocol was now viewed through the lens of discrimination and retaliation. Civil rights groups rallied in support of Cordelia. Advocacy organizations offered legal aid to others who had faced similar treatment. Former clients of the bank stepped forward with complaints of their own. A class action lawsuit began forming within days. And inside Empire National, the panic set in. Compliance officers scrambled to locate missing complaint files. IT departments were pressured to explain why Cordelia's digital footprint had been erased. Public relations executives attempted to spin the narrative, but it was too late. The court of public opinion had shifted. Social media erupted with hashtags like #StandWithCordelia and #BankOnJustice. Politicians who had once echoed falsehoods against her now tried to reposition themselves. Even Councilman Harold Vess, who had labeled her a threat to civil order, issued a shaky statement claiming his words had been taken out of context. But the damage to their reputations was irreversible. Meanwhile, Cordelia's legal team filed injunctions to freeze the assets of the branches directly implicated in her case. And they won. Within 72 hours, 3 bank locations were placed under audit review and forced to suspend operations. Clients withdrew millions in deposits. Investors fled. Board members resigned. The institution's stock plummeted. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a collapse. And Cordelia stood at the center, not as a victim, but as a force of reckoning. Yet, even as her enemies crumbled, she remained composed. She never gloated, never snapped back at those who had shunned her. She focused only on justice. When asked by a reporter how she felt seeing the people who once humiliated her now facing consequences, she replied simply, "They didn't just attack me. They attacked what I represent. They attacked fairness, access, and dignity. And that is what they now have to answer for." Her words echoed across the internet. Think pieces emerged overnight analyzing the layers of systemic bias, legal manipulation, and institutional cowardice that had allowed her persecution. Colleges began assigning her case study to law students. Journalists began investigating other banks for similar behavior. Cordelia had not only exposed one corrupt institution, she had sparked a national conversation. And all of it was rooted in the truth she refused to surrender. But even as the world began to shift in her favor, she knew the fight wasn't over. There were still hearings to attend, settlements to secure, and damage to undo. Video evidence, once doctored to discredit Cordelia, was now fully restored and authenticated by federal forensic analysts. In it, the unedited footage clearly showed Cordelia entering the bank in a calm, professional manner, identifying herself, and providing documentation before Trent forcefully grabbed her and slammed her to the ground without provocation. The Department of Justice issued a warrant for his arrest, and within days, he was taken into custody and charged with aggravated assault, unlawful detainment, and civil rights violations. His mugshot appeared on national news, alongside archived clips of him manhandling Cordelia. No longer a protector of property, he was now an emblem of unchecked aggression and institutional failure. Public sentiment shifted fully against him. Even his former employers issued a statement distancing themselves, claiming he had acted beyond the scope of his training and without authorization, a desperate attempt to salvage their own crumbling brand. But accountability didn't stop with Trent. Dorian Ashby, the branch manager who stood idly by while Cordelia was assaulted and later participated in filing a fraudulent restraining order, was next. Following a detailed federal review of internal communications, Dorian was found complicit in multiple cover-ups, including suppression of complaints, falsification of customer incident reports, and coercion of staff to support misleading narratives. The federal report stated that Dorian had not only failed to intervene, but had actively enabled a hostile, discriminatory environment. He was terminated from Empire National with cause, stripped of severance and benefits. But Cordelia didn't stop there. Her legal team filed a separate civil suit against him personally. The charges included defamation, negligent supervision, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal complaint. As the case gained traction, more employees came forward anonymously, recounting how Dorian had routinely ignored discrimination complaints, bullied junior staff, and protected misconduct if it benefited corporate interests. In court, Dorian appeared smaller than he once seemed. Gone was the corporate bravado. He sat in silence as Cordelia's legal team laid out a precise, methodical case built on emails, testimony, surveillance footage, and policy violations. The jury took less than a day to decide. Guilty. Cordelia was awarded significant damages, not just from Dorian, but from the bank itself. Both entities found jointly liable for intentional infliction of emotional distress and long-term economic sabotage. The award totaled 7 figures. When asked afterward what she planned to do with the settlement, Cordelia stood before a press conference, calm and measured. "I didn't fight this battle for money. "I fought it for justice," she said. "And now, I'm reinvesting every dollar into something this system failed to support: minority-owned businesses. We are launching the Justice Forward Initiative, a funding program to support entrepreneurs and creators who are denied fair access to capital because of the same bias that nearly destroyed my life." Her words lit up newsrooms and social feeds. What had once been a tragedy had now become a movement. Cordelia's foundation opened with immediate applications from across the country. Seed money from the lawsuit was distributed to over 30 startup founders in its first round, prioritizing Black women, formerly incarcerated individuals, and community developers. Each grant came with mentorship support, legal consulting, and digital infrastructure aid. Everything Cordelia had been denied during her darkest moments. Former adversaries now reached out in support. The same university that had quietly revoked her guest lecture slot now asked her to deliver a keynote on systemic reform. A national civil liberties nonprofit offered her a board position. Her story was featured on the cover of a major magazine, titled "The Woman Who Faced a Bank and Won." But the most powerful validation didn't come from headlines or awards. It came from those who once stood silent. Former clients wrote to her in apology. Several employees from Empire National resigned publicly, citing her courage as their awakening. Some of them even volunteered for her initiative, helping ensure that others would not be trapped by the same institutions that failed her. Cordelia moved into a new apartment, her lease fully under her own management. She hung new pictures on the walls, photos of her niece smiling, a framed newspaper clipping of her victory, and a letter from a young entrepreneur who received his first investment through her program. Her bank account, once locked and frozen, was now hosted at a small, Black-owned credit union she had helped fund. Her professional license had been reinstated, her mortgage cleared, her reputation not only restored, but elevated. The shadow that once loomed over her name had been banished, replaced by recognition, honor, and gratitude. And yet, she remained grounded. "What happened to me," she told a small gathering of supporters, "was never about one person." Months passed, but the ripples of Cordelia Bank's victory continued to widen. The Justice Forward Initiative had grown from a regional program into a nationally recognized organization, empowering voices long ignored by financial institutions. Cordelia, once silenced and stripped of dignity, now stood as a symbol of restoration, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Yet amid all the success, Cordelia never lost sight of what her journey truly meant. This had never been just about reclaiming her reputation or exacting punishment on those who wronged her. It had been about shifting a system, transforming a space of oppression into one of opportunity. That vision took shape in the most symbolic way possible when the lease to Empire National's former flagship branch expired. The building had been shuttered after the federal seizures, its walls stripped of the corporate logos that once represented a culture of quiet cruelty. Now it was hers again, not just in title, but in truth. Cordelia walked through its hollow corridors, remembering the cold marble where her body had once been pinned, the glass door through which she had been pushed, the camera that had captured her humiliation. But she didn't flinch. She saw it for what it was, not a monument to pain, but the perfect place for rebirth. She reopened the building not as a private bank, but as a community credit union, the People's Trust. Its charter prioritized financial access for underbanked populations, with programs tailored to support small businesses, young entrepreneurs, single parents, and marginalized communities. The vault, once filled with power leveraged against the vulnerable, now safeguarded their futures. The staff was diverse, trained not just in finance, but in equity principles and community engagement. At the entrance, beneath a new steel and glass sign, a bronze plaque was mounted into the wall. It read, "Justice lives here now." But the most surprising moment of all came quietly one morning, as Cordelia reviewed a new batch of volunteer applications for her foundation. She paused when she saw the name, Trent Hollinger. The same man who had once assaulted her was now asking to serve. His application came with a personal letter, handwritten, not emailed. In it, he didn't offer excuses. He described the months he spent in jail, the required therapy sessions, and the hours he spent rewatching the footage, not the doctored version, but the full unedited truth. He wrote of shame that kept him awake, of the moment he realized that the system he had sworn to protect was built on fear and prejudice. He admitted he had acted on assumption, not fact, and that his silence afterward had been cowardice. "I don't ask for forgiveness," the letter ended, "but I do ask for the chance to repair, to work, to serve, to stand beside those I once stood against." Cordelia read the letter twice. She closed her eyes and remembered the pain, the confusion, the helplessness. But she also remembered what it meant to be seen not for your worst moment, but for the possibility of better ones. She called a meeting with her board and asked them to review the application. After a long discussion, they approved. Trent joined the outreach program as a volunteer mentor for formerly incarcerated individuals, teaching financial literacy and reentry support. He never sought the spotlight. He worked quietly, diligently, always respectful, always mindful of the space he occupied. At a fundraising event 6 months later, Cordelia introduced him to the stage. She told the audience only the facts, that he had once harmed her, that he had repented, and that he had now dedicated himself to helping others rise. The room fell silent. Then Trent took the microphone. "I was part of the problem," he said simply. "But this woman, this leader, chose to build something instead of burning everything down. She gave me a chance to change, and I will spend every day earning that grace." The applause was not loud, but deep, genuine. That moment captured the essence of everything Cordelia stood for. Not just justice, but transformation. Not just punishment, but purpose. In the months that followed, the people's trust flourished. New branches opened. More businesses launched with support from her initiative. Her niece, once bullied, now toured schools with Cordelia to talk about resilience and truth. Dorian, still facing civil penalties, remained out of the public eye. Spence resigned from corporate finance altogether. But Cordelia didn't gloat. She moved forward with quiet resolve, carrying the weight of her journey not as a burden, but as a responsibility. On the anniversary of her victory, she walked alone into the lobby of her credit union, touched the bronze plaque, and whispered, "This is what justice looks like." And it was. Not rage, not revenge, but restoration. She had turned a place of harm into a haven. She had rewritten a narrative imposed upon her by others and replaced it with one of her own design. She was no longer a trespasser. She was the architect of something better. The end. If you found this story powerful, moving, or thought-provoking, consider showing your support by liking and subscribing for more narratives that tackle injustice, redemption, and transformation. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Cordelia's journey? Which moments struck you the most? And where are you watching or reading from? Drop a comment and join the conversation. Your voice matters.